If you're a trans person and you've spent any amount of time in online spaces, then surely at some point or another, biological essentialist arguments have been leveled at you, whether you recognized what they were or not. And they're so common with TERFs and transphobic people that I figured I would sit down and just discuss real quick what is biological essentialism and kind of what are the other components that make our identity. So biological essentialists want to argue that there are inherent traits that make a thing that thing. So they would say, for instance, that there are intrinsic inherent traits to gender that make you that gender, and they're immutable to an essentialist. So they would say something like, imagine in your head a chair. This is going to be a perfect chair. I then ask you, are you thinking of something like a recliner? Because to them, an essentialist, they might argue that in order to be a perfect chair, it must be a recliner. Everything else is something similar to a chair, but is not really a chair. Now, logic aside, to say, like, if you applied this to people, well, obviously you're just like no true Scotsman right here, where you're saying that you can't be a member of X group if you don't meet all the qualifications that they deem are required. However, it's also not true that they can just say inclusively, like, if you have these traits, it makes you automatically that thing. Because human identities are way more complicated than, let's just say, a chair. Which brings me to the second portion to this discussion. The biological essentialist side is saying that either genetically or that, traits that you have at birth make you X thing. They are discounting the idea of social constructionism. So what that is basically the idea that everybody is born as kind of a blank slate. And then through your upbringing, through the culture that you're introduced to, through the way that you're raised, your interactions with the world, and the way that your mind kind of pieces together your identity through your experiences and your interactions, social constructionism is basically why we would say something like gender is a social construct, or that even something as race is a social construct, because they are constructs. You're not born inherently just having some complete understanding of what it means to be like a man, a woman, or somebody that's non-binary. You discover yourself as you live your life and then come to the realization that, oh, you actually are a trans person, or you are cis, or whatever else. We know this with sexuality as well. You didn't have to be told whether you were heterosexual or gay or pansexual, whatever. You knew inherently, like, this is who you are. And this is why, to me, some people that want to make a biological essentialist argument, it's just awful. It's really fucking stupid. We know that there are some components to people that are inherent, whether they're genetic or whatever else. We understand that, your sexuality, for the most part, seems to be baked into you. However, an essentialist would say something like there must be a gay gene or something like this. And for those reasons, I think that we ought not care about these arguments. We shouldn't tolerate them. We know that very well there is some portion of our society that would want to use some information like a gay gene for nefarious purposes, and then through something like eugenics, trying to eliminate populations that they find undesirable. Now, did you always understand your sexuality? Probably not. It was probably a process of self-discovery, but biological essentialists would argue that you should have known right from the very beginning exactly what your sexuality was. We know that some of us end up having to explore ourselves and take longer than others. It's also possible that you thought that your sexuality was one thing, and then as you're exploring, you end up finding out that you are attracted to other people. So the options aren't just it is genetic or you're lying about it. You could be mistaken yourself, or you might just have slowly evolved on your position. Same thing can be true about gender. You could have been under the impression that you thought you were comfortable with an identity. You felt that you were comfortable expressing yourself with the way that would have been expected to have been correlated at birth. However, as you explore yourself, living through life, you find out that you're not content. That's not who you are. And that your actual true self you are trans or non-binary, and there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with you if that's the case. There's nothing wrong with you if you believe that at one point in time that you were heterosexual, then discover later on that you were bi or gay. And it's very short-sighted that an essentialist would make this sort of argument, because this is the same type of argument in essentialist position that a race realist would make. Now, a lot of people get very upset when you point that out to them. They say, like, if they're a TERF or whatever, they'll say, "Oh my God, you're calling me a racist as well as a transphobe." And it's like, well, I mean, like, what do you think about these other races? Because if you're so quick to accept essentialism as an explanation for, someone's gender, or, that makes them this thing, like, genetically, it's not too hard to see, like, well, what do you think about IQ? What do you think about the JQ? If you're so tied up with genetics, it also raises red flags for something like eugenics. People need to be aware of where these arguments lead. These ideas don't exist just on their own. If you are making the claim that a trans person will always be like whatever gender that they were associated with before their transition, you're also opening up the door for all kinds of other awful positions. These ideas don't just exist in a vacuum, and that's not even to touch on all the logical fallacies that essentialism entails. Something like the black and white fallacy, where you say, like, there's only one or two categories, then you end up finding out that there are multiple categories in that. There's the no true Scotsman fallacy. There's also the fallacy of division, where you say what's true of one component of something is true of the whole. There's all sorts of reasons why this line of thinking is just nonsense. There's so many problems with it. It's almost embarrassing that I keep having to hear this from TERFs. I get on Twitter, and it's like there's so many essentialist positions that they want to argue. I'm just like, this is like just so fucking stupid. This stuff has been debunked for centuries. I don't want to hear another stupid essentialist position. And if you're trying to argue that there's something about trans people that makes them trans and it's some type of genetic component, well, fucking maybe. But maybe whatever else that you like, every other portion of your identity might also have some component of genetics. No one's denying this. All that we're saying is that social constructionism answers for more of our identity than essentialism ever could. And if that makes you angry, then stay fucking mad. Click that little subscribe button and hit that bell. I will see you in the next video.